Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. Today, Online for Authors will be hosted by an amazing guest host, Carole O'Neill. Her guest is Maryann McFadden, author of the book, The Book Lover. In Carole's book review, she stated that if you love to read, and especially if you love to discover independent bookstores, you'll love The Book Lover by Maryann McFadden. Her bookstore owner, Ruth, is not only believable, but you'll find yourself encouraging her to find her way to the second chance she doesn't think is possible. In fact, the book is full of second chances. Just as you're sure you know where the story is going, you'll be surprised by a new twist you never saw coming. Any writer who is struggling with a decision of whether to self-publish or wait for an answer from an agent will recognize Lucy's dilemma and be amazed at how she solves her problems. This is an easy and enjoyable read that I recommend you add to your list of TBRs.
Today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with Maryann McFadden, the author of The Book Lover. Welcome, Maryann.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
When I first saw the book title, I thought, this is a book about someone who loves books, The Book Lover. I had no idea it was really about an independent bookstore with a cute name called The Book Lover. Why don't you give everyone that TV guide description, or as we authors call it, the elevator pitch, so they'll understand the book?
Absolutely. The Book Lover is actually kind of my love letter to independent bookstores. It is about a struggling author who has one last dream after losing so much in life, and that's to get her book published. And she lands on the doorstep of a little independent bookstore called The Book Lover and meets Ruth, the owner, who takes her under her wing in both the book world and in life. And it's really how these two women become deep friends and inspire each other to follow their dreams, but then in the end, it may all fall apart because of a little white lie.
Right. There is that moment where you think it's going nowhere. She's in trouble. Ruth was very interesting to me. I thought, here's a woman in her mid-60s. She's had this bookstore for many years, and now she's in trouble. She's trying to keep it open. And I think the fact that everything was against all odds, it seemed. She was so loved in that town. People used to bring her pierogies.
Yes.
She always had time to find the right book for the right resident in that town.
Yeah.
I thought I knew where this was all going with Ruth. And then you threw in that twist. Tell us about how she met Thomas.
I will. Here's the thing. When I know we're going to talk about my self-publishing to big book deal later on, this book was inspired by so many of the independent booksellers who became my champion and helped me get published in the end. One in particular, her name was Betsy Ryder, and she owned Otto's Bookshop. And Otto's was actually, the whole name was Otto's, a book lover's paradise. And it was in her family since the early 1900s. Anyway, Betsy shared so much with me. And one of the stories she shared with me was that in desperation, in trying to figure out how to stay afloat, she began selling books at the local state prison. And that, of course, triggered my imagination.
Of course.
And Thomas, my prisoner, was born. And I actually modeled Thomas's backstory, what he does that lands him in jail. I pull that from a friend's sort of dark moment in life where he did not end up in prison, but he was lucky he did not. So Thomas is really kind of a gentle, big teddy bear kind of a guy.
Yeah, he seemed that way.
Yeah. And, gradually Ruth brings books to the prison, just like Betsy really did. And she gets to know each of the prisoners. And this little effort on her part becomes their window to the world and begins to inspire them. But in the meantime, she and Thomas develop a friendship that starts to become something more, which is crazy when you think about it. But
It is a little crazy. And her daughter was not real happy about that. Um, it seemed as though almost everyone in your book, in the Book Lover, the characters were so well developed. It seemed as though any one of them could have been the lead and have had a whole story about that particular character.
Mhm.
And then you had her her daughter. I'm sorry, her son Colin, who
Yes.
had this interest in raptors. Where did that come from?
The Book Lover is my third novel, and my first two novels both had nature/environmental subplots. In my first book, I had loggerhead turtles. As you know, it's set on Pawleys Island,
Right.
yet near you.
Right.
And my second book, up on the Cape Cod, I had the endangered right whales. So this particular book, I had rescued a bird and taken it to the Raptor Trust here in New Jersey, which I became very interested in and knew that at some point I would want to use it in a story. And, a lot of times for me, things kind of magically fall into place after a lot of struggling to put things together and make them work in a book. And it turned out the raptors, the eagle, oh my gosh, it was obviously the perfect subplot for Colin as, an injured Marine.
Exactly.
And it just, again, things you keep plodding along and writing and you're not always sure. I write organically. I don't have everything outlined. And as I'm going along, I'm sort of playing with things and doing a lot of walking where a lot of my ideas come from. My brain is free. And as soon as that started, I knew that's what I was going to do. And I should mention that my husband of 35 years was a birder. He was an avid birder, and I became very involved with birds along with him. So, that sort of helped it along as well. I had a lot of knowledge from my years of sort of going bird watching with him. And, even on Pawleys Island, his favorite thing to do was to go down to the Santee and bird watch.
And look, oh, wow. Yeah, of course.
Which I write about in my new manuscript, which is not a book yet, but coming.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So the raptor story was so interesting, and you wanted to root to make sure that they were able to lift off, and they weren't going to, he wasn't going to be put in that space where it could never leave, and so you rooted for him. But I think, like I said, each one of those characters, Ruth, of course, the writer in the story, I think she was patterned after your own quest.
Yes.
I mean, when I read how not only did you find a publisher, but many of them bid to get your book after that. I mean, explain how that works, because so many of us have gone through the letters of rejection. Many people, we have a lot of writers groups down here in Myrtle Beach, and they all talk about that, and what the agent wants you to do, what the my first memoir was picked up day one by an agent at a writers conference here, but it wasn't the book I wanted when she wanted me to publish. So tell us about how you got that to happen.
It's such a long story, and that's why I wrote The Book Lover, sort of, because I did so much public speaking about it. I knew that I wanted to tell that story, but let me show you the book. This is my first novel in paperback. It's had many covers and many different issues. Originally self-published, then a hardcover with Hyperion. But how it started was this. I always wanted to write, and I was a journalist right out of college. I taught some journalism. I worked for Crayola, writing their corporate communications. And I knew that, at 22 years old, I wasn't going to write a novel and live on the proceeds. I'd be lucky to get published. So I freelanced for about 10 years, just working on articles, broke into national magazines. And then my life took a big turn. And I left writing for 10 years. I did not write for 10 solid years.
So that was when you were in real estate?
Yes. And, I watched my kids grow up. And when they were about to go off to college, I was young. I had my kids really young. I was in my mid-40s. And I decided, you know what? It's my turn again. I really miss writing, but I needed a jump start. So I went back to school. I got a master's in English with a concentration in writing. And the Richest season actually began first as a short story. Then when it was time for my thesis project, I took it and expanded it into 120 pages, which I thought was half a novel. Turned out when I finished the novel after graduating, it took me 2 more years because I was still working full time in real estate. I had 500 pages.
Oh my goodness.
And I worked on it, pared it down, got an agent immediately. I'm going to date myself now. This is 2001. In August of 2001, I had sent some queries out, and my big hope was the agent that represented the very first Oprah book club pick, if you remember, The Deep End of the Ocean. And I thought, the feedback on my book was phenomenal. And I thought, what, I'm starting at the top. Why not? And she was interested. And then 9/11 happened. And it sounds kind of crazy, but the hub of publishing, especially for women's fiction, which was my category, my genre, it kind of was up in the air. Everybody was trying to guess, because as we know, books come out 1.5 to 2 years after they're accepted.
Takes a while.
What were women going to want to be reading? My book was serious, what they call upmarket fiction. So she wrote me a lovely rejection letter and said, I really only take on 1 or 2 new clients a year. I don't know where women's fiction's going. And so I'm sorry, but I have to pass. For the next 5 years, I took the book in and out of a closet, sent it out, got it back. I had an agent who represented, if you remember, The Princess Diaries.
Of course, yes.
Movies with Julie Andrews. This agent, she was big. She took the book on exclusive and called me a couple of weeks later. And I mean, to get a phone call, I was like ready to fall down. I thought, this is it.
Right.
And she said, I really loved the book. And I heard the but coming.
You did.
But I wanted humor. I was like, what? I never said there was humor.
Right.
There was no humor. But what had happened in the interim was the new genre of what they had been calling chick lit, if you recall.
Chick lit, yeah.
That was booming. I was not that author. So after 5 years of ripping my hair out, writing a second novel, and continuing to work, I was now 20 years in real estate. I decided, print on demand had just started. Ebooks hadn't even begun. And I thought, you know what? What do I want? Because people were saying to me, where's your book? The ones that had read the manuscript.
Everybody does that. Yeah.
I had men reading it, my husband's clients and friends, and they were like raving about it because I have a really good male character. Anyway, I found a print on demand company called Aventine Press in California. I don't even know if they still exist, because that was the big day of Author House and Ex Libris.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody knew if that was the publisher, it was self-published.
Right.
My goal was to have my book out there and nobody really know, is it self-published? I wanted it judged based on its merits. Is it good enough? What did I really want? I wanted it read. Anyway, this is where I model, a lot of Lucy's story in The Book Lover.
Sure.
I ended up going up and down the East Coast from independent bookstore to independent bookstore, starting here in New Jersey, where, you walk in, you ask, especially back then, would you consider reading my novel? Yes, it's self-published. You get the eye roll a lot of the times. But I took my northern setting, Sparta, New Jersey, and I went to Sparta Books. I'm telling you, my knees were knocking. I was so nervous. I was embarrassed because there were a lot of people in the store. She was lovely. She read it, and a couple weeks later, she emailed me and said, Maryann, I loved your book. I could smell the salt marsh as I do in Pat Conroy's books. I'd love to have you for a signing. Wow. I just got goosebumps telling you this.
Of course.
This was the beginning. I then went to another indie that she said to me, go to Clinton Books. They became my biggest supporters. I've launched all my books there, except they now closed. I also orchestrated a giant book launch at our local university, who became also huge supporters of mine. I felt like a rock star that night. I was in all the big New Jersey newspapers because back then it was different. They covered that stuff.
Of course.
And I sold 100 books that night. A lot of big authors don't sell that with a traditionally published book.
Right.
So after 6 months of going up and down the East Coast, I was a book club pick in 10 states. And trust me, I worked my ass off.
I'll bet you did.
I was working it as much as I could. But my dream was this. I wanted to prove I had an audience to get somebody to pick it up. So in November, so this was May of 2006, I started. I launched. In November of 2006, I had sold about 3,000 print copies. And if you remember, again, this was not ebooks. This was print books that were physically being sold. They really weren't being sold online much. Amazon, a tiny bit, tiny bit. So I emailed 10 agents one night. And the next morning, immediately got a couple of rejections. And then I got a phone call. And I was like, oh my gosh. And this was the Victoria Sanders agency in New York. And her editorial assistant asked if they could take my book on exclusive. I was like, sure. They wanted 3 weeks. And I was very, very excited. 3 weeks became 6 weeks. We were now at Christmas, and I was thinking, all right, the writing is on the wall. And I sent an email figuring, I don't think it's rude at this point to say, what the heck?
Right.
I got back and said, we really got bogged down with the holidays and a few of our own title releases. Can you give us till after the new year? Well, after the new year, I got a phone call that said, hi, this is, I forget her name, from Victoria Sanders. Victoria would like you to come in and sign.
Oh, so this is a different agent at this point.
No, this is the one.
This was the one.
Yeah, no, this is a different one than 2001. This is 2006. Right. So this is the one that in November said they wanted it on exclusive, and now it's January, and they want me to come in and sign. And I said, does that mean she likes it?
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear those words. The book is good. Anyway, my ride in to meet her rivaled probably a Tom Clancy novel. There was a train shut down. President Bush was in New York. There were bomb alerts. And there was an ice storm where my car got stuck on my sister's driveway. But I got there and I signed. And within a couple of months, she sold it at auction to Hyperion Books. And then We sold foreign rights to Random House Germany, where it
Yeah,
became
I see you have it in someplace else, right? Yeah.
into Italy, to
Yeah.
Spain, and I was off and running. I was contracted to write my second book, which came out in hardcover the year after the Richest season. And again, I was off and running. But, after all that happened, and I went back on another book tour for the Richest season, I was speaking all over the place. I was on local TV in Charleston. I did a huge event in Charlotte for a private, very prestigious private school where at the end, the headmaster of the private school, the only man in the audience, came up to me and said, because my story is inspiring. Like, I didn't give up. And I sometimes look back and think, God, I had so much nerve back then. I don't know if I could do it. But he came up to me and said, I had tears in my eyes. You did not let go of your dream. And I said, I didn't because I really believed in it. And in that moment, I knew I wanted to write this story.
Right.
People don't know. The average reader picks up a book and has no idea how it starts in an author's head, goes through that whole writing process, and then the perilous trip through agents and publishers. And where does it end up?
Well,
most of the time,
right,
in the closet.
And most of the writers, especially the new ones, have no idea how much persistence you need, how much patience you need,
Oh my gosh.
and what will happen to that book.
Exactly.
I mean, so reading about Ruth and seeing how she went from leaving her husband and
that was
going up
Lucy. That was Lucy. Ruth was the bookseller.
I'm sorry, Lucy.
That's
right.
okay.
Leaving her husband and going up to Ruth. You could see what she went through, and it was just something that every writer hopes
Yes.
that will happen to.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just amazing.
And it's true. It's based on my
true story, right?
And the really incredible thing that happened was, again, I became intimately involved with so many little bookstores that, like, I saw this whole other side of the world. Like, I had the 360 view of the publishing world from all different sides, because I was also my own distributor. When I was self-published, I got my books in the car. I'm shipping them to people. I'm doing the marketing. I'm doing everything.
Well, that's what happens with independent,
Exactly.
So you have to do that. If people want to keep this book lover discussion going, you can head over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. And as you know, as a member of that amazing book club, you have the opportunity to win a digital copy of Maryann's book, Maryann McFadden's book, The Book Lover. But tell me a little bit about this. This was your side hustle, but after that, what happened? I know that you had a book that you wrote in Cape Cod, and that was what happened there. That was the second. Was that the second book that was published?
Yes. So here's the funny part of this. I sell the Richest season. I'm contracted to write a second book in the same vein, meaning upmarket women's fiction.
Right.
And I began writing. I knew I wanted to set it on Cape Cod. My sister lives there half the year. And again, with the beauty of nature up there, the opportunity with the endangered right whales, weaving that into a story. And I took my lead character, Claire Noble, who is a single mother and a history teacher in her mid-40s. And Claire's had a rough life, taking care of her daughter alone. She's also in the sandwich generation, which I was when I wrote it. I still am. And she has a love of photography. So it's, again, people going back to early dreams at midlife. And she gets this incredible opportunity to go to Cape Cod to study in a writing workshop. And as she's ready to leave, everything in her life hits the fan. So, she's struggling to figure out, how do I hang on to my dreams, help my aging parents, and then my daughter, who shows up with a backpack full of problems. I don't even know what I'm going to do about that one. So there's Claire. I set her on this journey. I don't always know where it's going. I write very organically, and I figure it out as I go along. But what was a little distressing to me was, they now had control. Before the Richest season was.
Did they change the name of the book?
Well, I wanted Cape Cod Light. They wanted So Happy Together. It was a title I had mentioned about a chick lit kind of novel I had been working on and ditched, but they loved the title. And honestly, it could work. It's an ironic title. I don't know what I'm doing with my hair. And other way. And they stuck to it. My agent said, let it go. They know what they're doing. And there we go. And so we stuck with So Happy Together. And I felt like the title and the cover, it was let me show it to you. I have it right here.
Okay.
Where is it? Where are you? Here you are. So this came out the following year. And it's a very romancy looking cover.
Yeah.
And a kind of a romancy title. And the story is a serious story about 3 generations of women. So what happened, I got to stop doing that. What happened was once So Happy Together was launched, and it also sold to Italy and Germany. And, but both my first 2 books are American Booksellers Association picks. Unbeknownst to me, if you recall, the economy began to tank in 2009 and 2010. Yep. I had no idea what was going on behind the scenes in publishing. They were in free fall. So I was working on The Book Lover at this time, and I was just about finished with it. My editor was interested in it. I wasn't contracted for it yet. So Victoria, my agent, said, no, you're going to, we got to write the book. So I wrote the book, was just about done with it. My editor had an early draft and she wanted it. And the next thing I know, Hyperion ceases publishing adult fiction. They are owned by ABC and Disney.
Right.
And they decided to go back to celebrity books and children's books.
Children's books, yeah.
So I became what is known as an orphaned author with my 3rd book.
So you went back to self-publishing.
I ended up with a small press. People I knew who were in the book world, who knew my work, were really supportive. There were so many authors at that time, like with their careers collapsing. They fired my agent who'd been with them for 20 years.
After all that struggle.
After all that.
You got. Yeah.
Exactly. So there I was, ironically, with this book called The Book Lover, about the book world. And, a lot of the pushback I got with The Book Lover was the honesty about the publishing world. I was still with Victoria. And she said to me, maybe you need to change Lucy's story. I have editors saying they're uncomfortable with it. Well, they were uncomfortable because it was about their world, where they were really brutal to writers.
Sure.
Anyway, I did not.
They had they had a goal, and it was theirs. It wasn't yours. I remember the first time that I spoke. I went to a conference, and they said, I want to hear your 2 lines. Just give me that pitch. What's that about? And I said, well, it's about my mother's affair with our parish priest and her secret family. I discovered after she died. The agent in the room stood up and she said, I want that book.
Yeah.
And she said, I want that book. And the next day she called. She took the book. She brought it to New York. And I would say, like you said, 3 weeks go by, 4 weeks go by, and they call it, we love the book, but we'd just like to make a few changes. One of the changes is we'd like it to have more sex. I said, this is my mother.
Yeah, really.
I wasn't there with them.
Right.
So I ended up self-publishing that because there was just too much going on with, I don't want to do that, and they wanted this, but that happens. And so I do think that the self-publishing world has grown and that it allows us to write the books we want to write.
Exactly.
In the way we want to write them. And
Yep.
you are a perfect example of that. I mean, you went on, what do you got? The Christmas Star? Was that another one?
Yeah.
And now what is your latest one? Is that?
Well, let me just finish with So Happy Together. I got my rights back. I got my rights back from Hyperion. Well, actually, Hyperion sold my titles along with all their others to Hachette. And then after 10 years, when my contract was up after the 10-year mark, I got my rights back, and I re-released So Happy Together as
Under Cape Cod Light. Okay.
And this is the actual lighthouse in Provincetown.
Right.
That is a focal point of the story.
Yeah.
And after Cape Cod Light, I wrote my only historical novel, which has done incredibly well.
The Cemetery Keeper's Wife.
The Cemetery Keeper's Wife is actually based on a true story, a brutal murder that happened in my hometown in the 1880s with a kitchen maid at our local university, which had been a seminary. And it was honestly the OJ trial of the Victorian era in this little town. So that's done incredibly well with book clubs. I stayed with the little small press that my friends had started. They were, as I said, in the book world, but not in the publishing part of it. And they became part of it. And then after 2 books, they were like, you know what? You know more about what we're doing than we do. So can you just take over? So I did. And I love the control. I have an audience.
Right.
I get frustrated sometimes with distribution. But, this past holiday season, I
did the Christmas Star.
And this book, it started as a screenplay, believe it or not. And I got a producer immediately. The movie's not made yet, but I thought, I've got the whole story.
Right.
So I can do it all.
You can.
I've learned how to do it all.
You can.
I do coach some other writers. I'm getting to the point where I might put that out there as like a little side business because I love doing it and I know so much. But the flip side of that is there are so many authors out there who come to me and immediately want to self-publish. And I caution them, this is your first book. A lot of big authors are doing both because they have the audience, they can make enough money to make it worth their while.
Right.
But, just as an example, the one that I was coaching, I said to him, number one, your book is packaged horribly. He went to, Amazon KDP. He didn't get it formatted beforehand. They formatted it. It was a young adult. So much white space. It was like 500 pages. And, it just really needed to be repackaged.
Right.
And I said to him, how to get an agent. This book is good enough. An agent who gets you a publisher will open the doors that you can't open.
Sure.
I mean, yes, some people do it, but there's so many self-published authors now that you can't just throw a book out there and think it's going to go. The marketing part is so much work, and you have to get more and more clever because it's such a flooded field.
I know. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and you can touch so many areas. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, my website is probably the easiest, MaryanMcFadden.com, and that's spelled with Maryann, not the I or the E that most people throw in there.
Right.
And I'm on Facebook, Maryann McFadden Author. I'm on Instagram, Maryann McFadden Author. And if they go to my website, they'll see my email, which is maryann.mcfadden@comcast.net.
All right. And now you're also over, on the new novels and latte book club.
Ironically, I just did a giveaway on there for the book lover before
that's wonderful.
So the book lover, it's funny. Here's the story with the book lover, and here's the cover. Believe it or not, I ran out of books. I'm trying to do this so everybody could see. It is based on a painting of a little independent bookstore. So the book lover originally came out in 2012. It was my third American Booksellers Association pick. And I decided in 2018, 2022, I apologize, to reissue it as a 10-year anniversary edition, because in those 10 years, so much had changed. In the book world. So
but I did put a new author's note in that one.
Yes, a new author's note. I did a new cover reflecting what I thought was a better cover,
right,
showing people that this is about a little bookstore. I wrote a new summary on the book, and I'll tell you what, it's definite proof that a book could have a second life, because it's my best-selling book right now.
That's amazing.
And, I think as it should be, because it really is. It's for authors. It's for readers. It's for anybody who loves books.
Exactly.
And it's that inside peek at the world that they love.
I know. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I wish you luck in your next endeavor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.